Welcome to another episode of Life Stories. Today, we dive into a journey of resilience, strength, and personal transformation. Meet Amanda, a woman who, after being blindsided by betrayal and heartbreak, finds herself rising above it all. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, life's most challenging moments can lead to the greatest personal victories. Join us as we explore how Amanda turned betrayal into an opportunity for empowerment and success. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. I still remember that moment with perfect clarity. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon, and the boutique was particularly busy. I was rushing around the store, helping customers and carefully arranging displays, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Robert, my husband of 12 years. At first, I thought it was just another one of his usual updates. But then I saw the words. The text, cold and blunt, shattered my world in an instant. I'm leaving you. I'm moving to Miami with Emma, my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Good luck. I stood there in the middle of the boutique, the reality of his words slowly sinking in. But my hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver as I greeted Mrs. Peterson, a loyal customer, and helped her pick out a scarf. The only indication that my husband had just, in one cruel swipe, ended our marriage was the slight tightening around my eyes. I could feel a coldness settle within me, an icy detachment. This wasn't a surprise. Somewhere deep down, I had known this moment would come. But when it arrived, it was like the floor had fallen out from under me. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left the store, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, before I composed myself and typed my response. It wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. I didn't beg or plead for him to reconsider. I simply typed, good luck. At 38, I had just received one of the most callous goodbyes in history. And yet, while Robert was probably sitting in some hotel room, gloating over his grand escape, imagining me crumpled in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up the boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months. Robert had always been distant, his late nights at work never matching the deposits in our joint bank account. He'd become obsessed with going to the gym, buying new clothes, trying to recapture a youth he never truly appreciated. I'd found a receipt for a dinner for two at an expensive restaurant months ago. A dinner he had claimed was a work event. That same evening, I'd gone online and opened a separate bank account at a different bank. When Robert mentioned, weeks later, that we should combine our accounts to make things easier, I'd agreed, cheerfully moving my personal savings into that account without him knowing. The joint account he had emptied? It contained exactly enough to keep him from getting suspicious about the 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he had made over the past year. As I locked the front door of the boutique, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Robert. Don't bother begging. Emma and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the shaking of my hands. Emma, the receptionist at his office. The young woman I had met at the company Christmas party. The one who had laughed too loudly at Robert's jokes and touched his arm whenever she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I had discovered the hotel charges on our credit card statement. It's time, I said simply. He had made his move. The divorce papers were ready. Do you want me to serve him in Miami? My lawyer asked. No rush, I replied. Let him think he's won first. I couldn't help but smile to myself as I put the phone down. Let him gloat. He had underestimated me. I had known exactly how to protect myself. And he had no idea that the game had already shifted. As I moved through the house, gathering the necessary papers for my lawyer, I came across our wedding album. The photos captured a different time. Robert looked so much younger, so full of life before his midlife crisis had turned him into the caricature he was now. He wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with 20-somethings at his office. The slang he used sounded ridiculous coming from a man in his mid-40s. As my phone buzzed again with more texts from Robert, I felt a strange sense of calm. They were all condescending, filled with empty words and cruelty. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop. The successful boutique I had built from scratch. The one that was generating more income than his middle management job. The one whose profits I had carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled as I thought of the certified letters that would greet him in Miami. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. I was about to enjoy mine. I spent that evening alone in our house. My house, which I had inherited from my grandmother and had always kept in my name despite Robert's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. It had been a lucky instinct. As I organized the paperwork my lawyer would need, I remembered that I had carefully separated all our finances over the years. Despite his mockery of my obsessive nature, when he had emptied our joint account, he thought he had won. But in reality, he had played directly into my hands. The truth was, while Robert was busy planning his escape, I had been planning my future. And now, the beginning of my new life was just around the corner. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, texts, and careful preparations. I could feel the weight of Robert's betrayal. But I didn't let it overwhelm me. Instead, I focused on what I needed to do, what I had been preparing for months. I had seen the signs, gathered the evidence, and quietly protected myself. As the reality of the divorce set in, I realized how much strength I had within me. I was no longer the woman who would fall apart over betrayal. I had learned how to stand tall, even when life knocked me down. I spent the next few hours drafting a plan, not just for the legal proceedings but for my life moving forward. Robert had no idea that I had already begun the process of severing our ties. Financially and emotionally, I had learned early on that when you rely on someone else to secure your future, you leave yourself vulnerable, and I refused to be vulnerable any longer. The morning after I called my lawyer, the papers were filed. I had already ensured that everything was in place, my separate accounts, my business assets, and even the house I had inherited from my grandmother. I had been meticulous, even obsessive, but now it felt like a victory. A quiet one, but a victory nonetheless. Robert's actions had only reinforced what I had known all along, that I needed to protect myself. No one else would do it for me. As I drove to the boutique that morning, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. Yes, Robert had just emptied our joint account, but I had already moved my personal savings into my own account. The money he thought he had taken from me was just a small part of a bigger plan. I had outsmarted him without him ever realizing it. I was ready for the fight, and I had the upper hand. That day, I called the credit card company to report the fraudulent charges Robert had made, booking first-class tickets to Miami for him and Emma, and reserving a hotel at the Royal Palm. I could almost hear Robert's voice in my head, smug and self-assured, thinking he was in control. He had no idea that I was already ahead of him. Mrs. Harrison, I see the charges. We'll cancel those immediately and remove your husband from the account, the representative said. I smiled to myself as I hung up the phone. The tickets would be invalidated, and their reservation would be cancelled. It was a small victory, but it felt good. It was just one more reminder that I was in control of this situation. Not him. Later that day, I received another text from Robert. This time, he tried to be condescending. Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. He had no idea that the house was mine. Legally and completely. My grandmother's house. Passed down to me, and protected by my name on the deed. It was mine, and Robert had no claim to it. I laughed out loud when I read his message. The sheer audacity of his words was almost laughable. But the next text hit a nerve. I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half. I felt a sting at that. He thought he could just waltz in and claim half of something that I had built from nothing. Something I had worked for. Sweat and tears poured into it. But I had always kept it separate from our finances. It was my hard work, my vision, and he had no claim on it. The boutique wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of my independence. I had built it while he complained about my long hours and called it a hobby. How easily he dismissed my passion, thinking it wasn't worth much. That evening, after I'd spent the day sorting through paperwork, I sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, sipping a glass of wine. The good stuff. The one I'd been saving for a special occasion. I smiled, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. Robert had made his move, but I had already anticipated it. My lawyer would soon have all the evidence to show how Robert had systematically emptied our joint account. How he had misused our credit cards to fund his escape with Emma. I knew he was about to learn the hard way that I was not a woman to be underestimated. The phone buzzed again. It was Robert. "You think you're so smart," he wrote. "But I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine." I forwarded his message to my lawyer. "Let him dig his hole deeper," I said, feeling a surge of confidence. I wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was on my side. And it would take more than Robert's threats to shake me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The divorce proceedings were fast-tracked, especially after Robert's admission of fraudulent charges. My lawyer presented all the evidence, my detailed records, the credit card fraud, the suspicious transactions, and Robert's own text messages. Every word he had sent me, every move he made, was part of the puzzle I had carefully assembled. It was clear that Robert had been so focused on escaping his responsibilities, so caught up in his midlife crisis, that he never saw me coming. And now, it was too late. The truth was out, and it would set me free. The day of the emergency hearing finally arrived, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. As I walked into the courthouse, I felt a calm confidence that I hadn't felt in years. Robert was there too, of course, looking completely out of place in his tight designer jeans and ill-fitting blazer. An attempt at recapturing his youth that only made him look ridiculous. His face was a mask of forced bravado, but I could see the subtle signs of panic creeping through. Melissa, the young receptionist he had so foolishly chosen over me, was nowhere to be seen. Her absence, in a way, spoke volumes. My lawyer and I were ready. We had spent hours meticulously preparing for this day, combing through every piece of evidence, ensuring that we had an airtight case. Robert, on the other hand, seemed to be relying on his desperation, hoping his lawyer could find some loophole. But there was no escape for him now. I had everything I needed to secure my future. The courtroom was quiet, but I could feel the weight of the moment. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a stern demeanor, began reviewing the evidence. My lawyer presented the case with precision, detailing the fraudulent charges, the evidence of Robert's premeditated actions, and the separation of assets that had been carefully maintained throughout our marriage. Robert's lawyer tried to downplay the severity of his actions, claiming that it was just a mistake, a rash decision, but the judge wasn't having it. She turned to Robert and asked, "Do you deny deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend?" His discomfort was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Robert had never imagined his actions would lead to this moment. The judge then addressed the issue of the separate property. Robert had tried, in his usual arrogant manner, to claim ownership of half of everything, including my boutique, claiming it had grown during our marriage. But the judge wasn't fooled. "The business was established before your marriage, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice firm, "and your wife has clearly maintained a strict separation of her business and personal finances. She has done everything by the book, while you have been anything but responsible." I watched as Robert's face grew red, his defiance slowly crumbling. The court wasn't going to reward his deception. I had known, deep down, that this was coming. Robert had always taken our marriage for granted. He thought he could leave, take everything with him, and I'd be left with nothing. But he had underestimated me. I had built my business from scratch, invested my time, my money, and my heart into it. It wasn't just a hobby, like he had always dismissed it as. It was my life's work. And now, it was my ticket to freedom. The judge's final decision was everything I could have hoped for. All shared assets were frozen, pending the final dissolution of our marriage. Robert was ordered to return any funds he had removed from the joint account within 24 hours. But I knew that money was long gone. The judge made it clear that the court would take a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund an affair. And Robert's behavior had been nothing short of fraudulent. I couldn't help but smile. feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. He thought he had won. But in reality, he had only ensured his own downfall. As we left the courthouse, I heard Robert muttering angrily under his breath, probably trying to salvage whatever was left of his ego. But his mother was there, waiting for him, ready to drive him home. It was almost pathetic to watch. A man in his mid-40s, having to rely on his mother after losing everything. I couldn't help but feel a small amount of pity. But only for a moment. The truth was, Robert had done this to himself. He had made his bed. And now he was going to have to lie in it. I spent the next few weeks focusing on what really mattered, my business, my future, and my peace of mind. The boutique continued to thrive, thanks in part to the local gossip about my situation. Women came in, showing their support, often spending far more than they had intended. It was a strange sort of validation. But it felt good. I had never been the type to rely on anyone else for validation. But it was nice to know that my community had my back. In the midst of it all, I started to realize something profound. Robert's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had pushed me to become a better version of myself. It had forced me to take a good, hard look at who I was, what I wanted, and what I was willing to tolerate. It had shown me just how strong I truly was, how capable I was of handling adversity. It wasn't just about revenge or getting back at him. It was about building something that was entirely my own. Something I could be proud of. As the weeks turned into months, I began to look at the future with a renewed sense of hope. I had my business, my independence, and my self-respect. Robert's actions had shown me what I was truly capable of. And now, it was time to move forward. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the lessons I had learned. And as for Robert, he could keep his lies, his failed relationships, and his empty promises. I was too busy living my life, building my empire, and proving to myself that I was stronger than he had ever given me credit for. As time went on, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I had come. The journey from that painful text to the woman standing in front of her boutique, thriving and successful, was one I never could have imagined. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the uncertainty had all led to something beautiful, something I had built with my own hands. Looking back, I felt no bitterness toward Robert. His actions had only propelled me forward, forcing me to embrace my strength and independence. The lessons I learned from the ordeal were invaluable. I had discovered the importance of protecting what was mine, not just financially but emotionally. I had learned to trust my instincts and stand up for myself. I had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. The boutique continued to grow, becoming a symbol of resilience and empowerment. It wasn't just a business anymore, it was a testament to everything I had overcome. My story, once filled with sadness and betrayal, had transformed into one of triumph. I had created something lasting, something that would outlast the past. And I was finally at peace with it all. As I walked into the store one morning, my phone buzzed with another message. This time, it wasn't from Robert, but from a young woman asking for business advice. She had heard my story and wanted to learn how to protect her dreams, just as I had protected mine. I smiled, knowing that the lessons I had learned would continue to help others long after my own struggles had ended. For me, this was just the beginning. Life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't about to waste it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring life stories.